Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, July 14th, 2022, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, June 23rd,
Yeah.
23rd, 2022. Sorry, having microphone issues.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 12, the draft order to reopen the proceeding in docket 6680 UR 123 associated with agenda item 13, the draft order to reopen notice and request for comment in docket 5 DR 112 associated with agenda item 14, or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 16 approving the request to return Northern Natural Gas refunds through the purchase gas adjustment over one gas year beginning November 1st, 2022, and authorizing carrying costs at the customer deposit rates consistent with the applicant's tariff.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 10.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. For agenda items 11 and 12, I move we approve the notices of proceeding.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. For agenda item 13, docket 6680 UR 123, I move that we approve the draft order to reopen the proceeding.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
For agenda item 14, 5 DR 112, I move that we approve the draft order to reopen notice and request for comment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Agenda item 16, docket 3670 GR 106, I move that we approve the request of Midwest Natural Gas to return Northern Natural Gas refunds and customer true-ups through the purchase gas adjustment over 1 year beginning November 1, and authorize carrying costs at the customer deposit rate.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That takes us to agenda item 15, which is docket 5-TG-101. This is the application of Wisconsin Electric Power Company gas operations, Wisconsin Gas LLC, and Wisconsin Public Service Corporation for approval of draft tariffs, that would establish a renewable natural gas pilot program that would enable Wisconsin farms and other entities to produce and sell renewable natural gas to the utility applicants. Under the RNG pilot, the utility would finance construction of interconnection facilities to the applicant's natural gas distribution systems on participating customers' premises, facilitating the delivery and sale of RNG from those participating customers to the utility. The applicants are also requesting that we approve deferral of the costs associated with the installation of the required natural gas distribution interconnection facilities until their next base rate case. And the estimate is that the current estimate is that each project would cost approximately $2 to $5 million for those distribution interconnection facilities. And my understanding is that those facilities refer to the pipe, the gas monitoring equipment, control valves, and anything else to ensure the gas quality and protection of the utility's gas distribution systems. This is a little unique, and we've talked about renewable natural gas from other utilities. And renewable natural gas has had a fair amount of conversation around it, both nationally and within the state. This one is a little bit different in that it's likely that the farm owner will contract with an RNG developer, and then that RNG developer would contract with whatever utility, the service territory that they're in. And so there really are three parties who would enter into this agreement. And if the RNG developer or the customer, whomever whomever ends up being the customer of record for the utility, if they decide to terminate the agreement, they would be on the hook for the remainder of those distribution costs. And that is an attempt to keep the cost associated with this pilot program confined to those who would like to participate. Whoever the third party ends up being, whether that's the RNG developer or the farm owner, they would own and operate the equipment, and within their premises, and then connect to the utilities distribution system. I had drawn up a very nice picture. Oh, mine had an actual farmhouse on it with a silo.
I did too. It was simple.
To try to figure out, kind of, just to make sure, right, what's coming from where. And so we have a couple of questions in front of us. The utilities are actually proposing a cap. They would only offer this to 15 customers total. And that, to me, seems to be in an effort to do two things. The first thing is to sort of gauge interest within the market, and the second thing is to try to control costs. Because, as I said, they're estimating between $2 and $5 million for those facilities. The customer would retain the renewable assets from the renewable gas production. Then the last part that's in front of us is if we decide to give this pilot a go-ahead, the applicants have sought deferral of those costs until their next rate case. A big part of this is that while the utility is taking on the cost of installing the distribution interconnection agreement, the participating customers will receive or will agree to a gas offtake agreement with that utility, which will essentially provide the renewable natural gas to the utility at a discount. That discounted price of the commodity then flows through the fuel cost or the PGA. And the theory is that that will work to bring all customer costs down. And again, if a customer decides to terminate early, they would be responsible for whatever is remaining for the costs of the distribution interconnection facilities that has been paid for by the utility. There was a little bit of back and forth about sort of the contractual arrangement, specifically as it related to that third-party renewable natural gas developer rather than the farm itself. There was a question about, well, doesn't that, and we've talked about this in other situations before, other examples of where a third party would come in and essentially act as the financer, or in this case, the farm might not have the technical expertise to actually develop the RNG, so that's why they would contract with a third-party RNG developer. And so the agreement might not always be between the actual owner of the farm and the utility, which to me sounded a lot like what we talk about when we're talking about solar development. And so it was interesting to me to see the conversation on the record, and there were questions and comments that hit on this. But from the utility standpoint, they're claiming that there's no distinction between the farm developing RNG production facilities itself or the RNG developer developing. So I just thought I thought it was an interesting corollary that we're seeing in this particular circumstance. So because we've looked at RNG in the past, we have some experience as it relates to safety and testing, because the early versions of RNG caused some concerns about how corrosive it was and potential damage it could do to the pipeline. I feel comfortable that our staff has done a really good job in coming up with standards and questions to ensure that that doesn't happen. It also occurs on the utility side, right? Because it doesn't behoove them to be injecting something into their distribution system that could potentially be detrimental to those pipes. So we have just a couple of decision points in front of us, unless either of my colleagues just want to make any opening remarks. I'll open it to you if that's the case.
Just briefly, I think this is, it's good to see the utility bring this forward. Obviously, it must be in response to some customer interest. And as you mentioned, renewable natural gas is, we want to see where it goes. And this is a slow start to it, and I think that's the right way to do it. I think the cap size is reasonable, and I like how they structured it to prevent that cost shifting to non-participating customers. So, this is how we have to. This to me is what more of a true pilot. Some things we get, they slap pilot on it. This is more of a pilot to me than what we've seen with some others. And we can talk more about the third-party solar. I know we've got a couple dockets coming up. This was distinguishable to me and as to who owned it and how it was produced and where it eventually went. So I didn't have any concerns about that here in this case. So other than that, I am supportive of this and, with one modification on the reporting, prepared to approve it.
Okay, great. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm going to support this as well. I think it is an evolving market. It's good to see the utilities, getting into it and looking at ways that they can support their customers. The one item that really was not in the record, I was a little surprised that we didn't hear anything from the industry or those developers. When these types of things come around, solar is one example, but RNG filling stations, there's been others, questions about private market versus regulated utilities and where those lines are. It's always beneficial to me to hear how the private market, are they seeing this as collaborative and a win-win for them, or are they seeing this as possibly encroachment? There's really no discussion of that. There was no public comments. It would have been, I thought, helpful to hear from some of those members to keep making sure that we're on, the balance beam of making sure that we're not allowing regulated utilities to sort of come into private markets. And so one thing related to that is, now through this tariff, the companies have established the safety quality mechanisms and standards that they will be applying to the gas that they're going to receive. And I guess to me, the conversation then is, are there opportunities for those private farms, private developers to inject gas themselves if they're willing to meet those same standards, but without the utility investment? So those are things that I think we can continue to look at going forward. But based on the record we have here, I'm going to be supporting the pilots as a move ahead. So thanks.
Okay, great. So the first decision point is on page 14 of our memo. For the RNG pilot itself, I was at Alt 2. I would approve the pilot draft tariffs. There's just a couple of tweaks I would make. I would add some reporting notification conditions. So that's why I'm at Alt 2. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, I think same all two, just with the conditions we'll have on reporting here.
Okay.
So I'm in the same spot.
Okay. So about notification and reporting, there were a couple suggestions made. One that we might consider requiring the utilities to notify us of interconnection or disconnection of the RNG production facilities for their system, as well as just the number of pilot participants. And then there's some testing that would be done. The utilities submitted comments and indicated that they don't have any issue with these notification and reporting requirements, but they suggested that perhaps in an attempt to make things a little more efficient and streamlined, that we roll this into just an annual report that's already required of them, and I don't have any issue with that. And so I was okay For the notification of interconnection and disconnection, I was at Alt 1, but I would remove that within 30 days for that one. So I was at Alt 1, deleting the words within 30 days.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't sure what the value added was to us knowing within 30 days.
Right.
I mean, what are we going to do with it? It's more the cumulative effect of it, and annual reporting would be fine. So they suggested rolling it into the sub-alternative on reporting. That's fine, or
Yep.
however we want to word it, but I'm fine with annual.
Yep, I'm fine with annual. I mean, one of the questions we asked was just on the safety side. Does our staff need to know when there's an interconnection? Does that mean something for them from a pipeline safety perspective? Talking to staff, our understanding is no, that there's other ways they'll find that out. So, so with that, the reporting side, I was okay with the annual
Okay, so then.
on the notification too.
So then for reporting requirements on page 15, I was fine, again, with Alt 1, both of the sub-alternatives, and then just changing the word periodic to annual. And that should clean everything up to be in line.
Yeah, and the RNG testing, I don't know when that's done, but how often, on sub-alternative A, if you're okay with that. I don't know how, I mean, I would just maybe put that in the, I would prefer to roll that all in the annual.
Yep,
So, okay,
agreed.
okay.
Commissioner Huebner?
Okay, yeah, and I'm fine with Alt 1, and I had both sub-alternative A and B. On A, it kind of got to that question about just the safety aspect. Is there something that they need to know more frequently than annual? If, for example, a test result is not in compliance, does that mean we have to do something? So I guess I was fine leaving that with the timely results, kind of depending on how the results shake out as opposed to annual.
I guess it was
More
just-
on the safety side, less on the administrative side.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, there's
So-
interconnections that go on outside of RNG all the time, so
Yeah.
it wasn't sure that this rose to being different than others, so
Right.
I just felt that it should be, how it's handled with other.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
So, okay.
So you're okay with that?
Yeah, I think as Commissioner Nowak said, I mean, I think the interconnections of RNG should follow the same kind of procedures. If our team needs to be notified, let's follow that procedure. Yeah, okay.
All right. And then deferral. So the utilities have requested deferral of these amounts, and they have looked at staff accounting policy statement of position, the SOP, which we use to guide our decisions related to deferral. This one for me, I will admit, I went back and forth because on the one hand, it is important to, I think, encourage pilot programs, especially programs like this that are small and that are tailored. And the cap of 15 customers, for me, sort of got at limiting the materiality of the costs. But the flip side of that argument is if we're going to encourage pilots, we also have to encourage or sort of reiterate our support and that they're allowed to defer those costs. Understanding, of course, that anytime we grant deferral, that's not an automatic approval of recovery of those dollars in rates. That comes at a later time. So ultimately, I landed at allowing the deferral. And my understanding is that this would be in test year 2025, that rate case, which I think is UR 1 on, I'm not going to say it out loud because it's probably going to be wrong. So I was at Alt 1. I would approve it.
Yeah, I did that same analysis. It's not a material amount, particularly for this utility, but I think we work against ourselves by encouraging these types of tariffs to come forward to us for consideration if we're not going to allow it. So I am fine with deferral on this.
I agree. Okay.
Yeah, I'm at Alt 1 as well, and I, kind of looking at our 4-part test, I thought this cost was unusual and new. So was one of the reasons why I thought deferral made sense.
Okay.
Okay. In docket 5TG 101, I move that we approve the application of Wisconsin Electric Power Company gas operations, Wisconsin Gas, Wisconsin Pub Service for renewable natural gas pilot pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That brings us to agenda item 17, which is docket 9705-FG-2022, and Commissioner Hebner is going to lead the
Yes.
discussion on this one.
Thank you. So this is an administrative item for the commission related to our delegation of authority. It's related to delegated item number 128, which was related to our Office of Energy Innovation and the state energy program that is housed within it. As you're both aware, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act has passed Congress, and there's numerous provisions within the state energy program that will be flowing down to every state. And a lot of those are formula grants, but there's also a number of competitive grant items. And so as staff kind of was looking at all the different opportunities that may be coming our way, and obviously wanting to attract as many dollars to Wisconsin as we possibly can to support the state, one of the things that they looked at is how can they do that in an administratively efficient way. And feeling like the way that the delegation is currently written creates some questions about, for example, can the office identify a good competitive grant and move quickly enough, or do they need our approval to go through and, apply for every single competitive grant that they may have available from the federal government? So that was one of the drivers. And so at the end of the day, there's a good explanation of the change in language and how staff intends to use it, and I thought that intended use section was very helpful in kind of putting boundaries on what the purpose of this is, in that, the commission would still be awarding grants, we would still be making key planning decisions as an entire body, but then when opportunities come up for competitive grants, the office could move more quickly. And then, other things like if a grantee drops out, do we need to come back to the full three of us with memos and things like that to just kind of select the next grant on the list and keep the dollars flowing? So at the end of the day, I was fine with this. This is language that the commission had adopted before. So I was at alternative 1 to approve the revision as proposed. So Chair Vach, I'll pass to you.
Okay, I was at the same spot. I was at alternative 1. I mean, we have, like you said, this is delegated item number 128. We have a number of delegations in an effort to streamline and make things efficient. I didn't read any of this as sort of minimizing the role of the full commission, because as you said, all competitive pass-through grants will continue to come up to us. We did something similar in this last EIGP round, where we allowed the delegated commissioner to move on to the next person on the list or grant applicant on the list. And furthermore, for me, as delegated commissioner, you provide us with updates. And so those updates are provided on a timely basis so that we are kept apprised of what's happening related to your delegation. And if I have a concern or if I would like, my opinion or my feeling on something to be known that I pick up when I read that memo, I do that. I reach out to that particular division. So I was okay with it, the way that it's drafted. So I was also at Alt 1.
Okay. Commissioner Nowak.
Thank you. Yeah, just a few things. There's going to be potentially, at least in the next couple years, we know of at least 20 million now flowing through. And then one of the programs is a 5 million a year for 5 years, so there's at least 5 million every year after that. So when I first read this and the memo was like, well, there's going to be more money coming through, we need to streamline this and make it faster. I'm like, wait a minute, this calls actually for more participation, more transparency rather than move it through quick. And So I just wanted to clarify, and I know the guidance isn't out yet on a lot of these.
right.
So I don't want to jump ahead on getting too granular because we don't even know what the guidance is going to be on all this money coming through and if we want to go after it. So I think that, and if we do need to move quick, we can meet more than once a week if we need to. So we can be nimble too. But so what I've done, because at first I thought it's just premature to do anything until the guidance comes out. That was my initial reaction, is like, well, why don't we wait and see what these competitive grants are? Because as I understand, the language doesn't change much to the STEP program, that the more formula grants, but it's the competitive ones where, and I'm like, well, if we don't even know what the guidance is, how can we make up a delegation to something and we're just guessing? So I do have a handout, and it just, to me, it clarifies kind of what we've been doing with the competitive grants and how that additional, so you said we did it with the EIGP grant program. I want to clarify that, if funds come back, if a loan for some reason isn't accepted by the recipient, we should, at our open meeting, decide, rather than just say the next one's on the list, because, I don't always agree with the order of the list, as you probably have noticed. So I don't want to just say, go to the next 2. I think we should sit here and say, okay, we're awarding these 10, but here's 4 backups. Okay. And go either in this order or how they, I think we should just be a little more specific on that. So that's what the intent of this language does here. And then, also allows for, some execution of a contract or agreement with a subrecipient. And I also think that we should clarify that the decision whether or not to pursue some of these other grants should be a commission decision. So I just wanted to me, that wasn't clear in the delegation. Because there could potentially be a lot of money coming, and we might get it and like, well, why do we have this grant program now? I think that should be a decision by us. And I think this would even allow for, if staff saw, they could put in like a placeholder, we're interested, but then bring it to the commission before we got the funds or even fully executed a contract on it. So it does allow some nimbleness on the delegated commissioner side or the staff side to say, this could be interesting, let's put a marker on it, I'll come back and discuss it. It allows for that. And then we just, part 3 just clarifies how we've been handling settlements from, that was vague in the delegation. And all settlements should be a discussion among the 3 of us. So.
Right, I just need to
Sure.
compare.
Yeah, it was a little hard, yeah.
Thanks for including my name in your draft, though, because that was one thing that I was like, okay, we're going to delegate it back to Lon.
I don't think Lon will want that from the
Yeah,
golf
right.
course.
All right, let's see.
Okay.
So this is 3.
And just for those that are listening, the handout, to the extent you're interested, is on the events calendar.
That's pretty. You can work with Grace. Makes for good live YouTube.
Yeah, I think so. You think? Do you have questions, Commissioner Hiebner?
Sure.
This could be the same as they're asking for.
we just lay it over? We don't need to do it today.
Ready?
Sure.
Okay. Chair, if you don't mind, if you have thoughts, it would be great to hear your reaction to Commissioner Nowak's proposal.
Sure. I think that the suggested changes by Commissioner Nowak to Romanet 1, which is clarifying that, you know, we sit here and we talk about the grant applications we've received, the recipients, the list, we'll call it the list, and then give direction and say, if for whatever reason awardees drop out, we authorize you to go forward with the first 4 on that list. I think that that's an important clarification. So I would accept that. I would not accept the changes to Romanets 2 or 3. I would revert back to the language that's been proposed in the memo.
Okay. Thanks. I think I'll pose this question to Commissioner Nowak, maybe. On page 9 of the memo, at the very bottom, under the bullet point there, the second sentence, the delegated commissioner may select grant recipients as appropriate beyond the list of commission-approved grant recipients as funds become available. That, we were looking at that language as a way to bound what was written previously, which is to say, confirming your approach, which we've always done, is the commission selects, but then beyond that, giving, I guess, a little more flexibility to the delegated, as opposed to, and maybe your language does basically match that, or I don't know.
This just narrows, let's take
Yeah.
an example. 2 weeks ago, we did broadband, and there were a lot
Yep.
that did not get selected.
Yep.
So, in fact, probably more didn't get selected than
Yeah,
got selected.
yeah.
The way I read the proposed language was you can select from any of those that
Right.
didn't get selected. Whereas my language just says, let's just narrow that down a little bit, because I think that's a bit too much discretion for any one person. Because it could potentially, it could be several $1 million.
Right.
So I just think we should narrow that more on who gets to, what ones would be able to be selected from.
Yeah.
And I do like the idea of when, for instance, 2 weeks ago, if we had said, sort of our alternates are, we all agree on
Yeah.
these as sort
Right.
of the alternates.
Right.
Because, I do agree, when there are 100 recipients that didn't receive funding, I would want to guard against any, not just you, any delegated commissioner
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of-
picking number 100,
Yeah.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
I am comfortable that Commissioner Nowak's language does
Okay.
exactly that.
Okay.
That it essentially affords us an opportunity to say, and we have an alternate list. And go ahead and pick from that alternate list.
Yeah. And I was kind of thinking about it as in almost the reverse of the $1 million grant is the $100,000 or $200,000 grant. You know, if that's the one that doesn't get selected or that drops out, then, you know, it may be 10 down the list before you get another grantee that is in that ballpark. So then I guess you would just hold, the
Money
funds
can
would just
roll
be on
over. Yeah.
hold or
Yep.
rolled
Yep.
over
Yep.
until, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, I'll join you on Romanet I, the two of you. Let me look back at the second two. I'm just looking at Romanet 3, and it says approval of new loans, and whether or not that language on 3 should actually kind of mirror the new language we adopted on 1, which would be approval of loans, additional or alternative loan recipients consistent with direction received. We don't have a loan program right now, but I know one of the IIJA programs is a loan program. So it could be the case that we would be basically in the same spot of approving an initial set of loan grantee recipients, but then having a list of alternates. So maybe it almost makes sense under I to just put grant or loan recipients. No? Getting a shaking head. Yeah. But then we do have the handling of existing loans to do and the settlement piece. The other option I would propose is maybe to lay this over and continue to discuss it with
That was
staff
my
and see what
initial
the implications are.
reaction when I read this was, there's no urgency, and we dug into it, so, yeah.
So maybe
Lay it
we do
over.
that,
Yeah.
and then I can get more information from staff and maybe
That's great.
a
Maybe
further
we'll have
red line.
guidance by that time.
Right, we'll lay it over.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Okay, so now we move to agenda item 18, which is docket 6680-TE-107. This is Wisconsin Power and Light's proposed parallel generation revisions. And we had a discussion about NSP's tariffs a couple weeks back, and I think it's, just turn on my microphone. I think it's important to reiterate what we all said when we talked about NSP's changes to its parallel generation tariff. Number one, that this is an ongoing process. It's not going to be one and done. So as things sort of shift and as the makeup of distributed energy resources continues to change, these tariffs will continue to be examined and I would imagine would continue to be modified. It's also, I think, worth repeating that these tariffs are not one size fits all. I think even just looking at the difference between Power and Light's tariff and suggested language and methodology and modeling, you can appreciate the differences that are inherent between the utilities. So again, we have a decision matrix to help guide us. We had really robust involvement by Renew and by CUB. Specifically, I found the testimony to be extremely helpful. I also think it's important to repeat here again that what we're deciding is whether or not the utilities revisions are reasonable. So it's not, are the tariff provisions perfect? It's not, that they're the only option. Certainly, there are other revisions or modifications that could be made. I will suggest a couple of changes, but I think it's important to keep that in in the back of everyone's mind when we talk about that, and that is that the decision is, are the proposed modifications just and reasonable? So I didn't have any overarching comments.
I don't either.
Okay. Just want to dive right in. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so the first is that Wisconsin Power and Light has proposed revisions to its PGS-1 language that lowers the maximum capacity limit from 12,000 kilowatts to 5,000 kilowatts in response to FERC Order 872. This is consistent with that order from FERC, and this new 5,000 kW maximum limit would apply to both their proposed option A and option B. So for this one, I was at alternative 1.
I agree.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm going to flag an item that to me is pretty foundational to this whole docket, and it does come up later in the issues 8 and 10. Cub raises it, I think, in 8, and Renew raises it in issue 10. And that's related to basically front-of-the-meter resources that are independent qualified facilities. So as I look at this question of availability language, later we'll talk about the availability to, you know, a hydropower facility that's not near load or a biodigester that's not near load. And my view is that, you know, those should be eligible. So as to the change down to 5,000 kilowatts, I understand that and I'm fine with that. I think making sure that it's clearly marked that that's AC is important in the tariffs as opposed to DC. But the broader availability language is sort of, for me, is conditioned on how we land on 8 and 10. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, so you want to come back to this?
Well, I think we'll deal with it in those issues, whether or not to take up the recommendations of Cub and Renew.
Okay.
And we could come back to it if you want. But I would be at Alt 2. I would modify some of the language to make it available to independent generators as described later
Okay.
in this
All right,
document.
so we'll come back to this one. Maybe it'll be, maybe our discussion will clarify. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Issue 2, are the applicant's proposed monthly grid connection charges just and reasonable? Here, the applicant has proposed to maintain customer charges under the PGS-1 tariff, but then they've also proposed a new grid connection charge for the PGS-1 option B. In this particular case, and I verified this, that it was on the record. But in this particular case, I think that there was ample justification for this new grid connection charge. And so I do think that it is just and reasonable. So I was at alternative 1.
I agree.
I'm at alternative 1 on that as well. Thank you.
Issue 3 relates to the continuing to use forecasted locational marginal prices to determine avoided energy costs. So in our 5 EI 157 docket, we talked about this conceptual framework, which is leading to these tariff filings from the large investor-owned utilities. And we, in that docket, we declared that the calculation of avoided electric energy capacity and transmission costs will serve as the starting point for us to determine what the appropriate rates are. And we did, in that docket, specifically talk about using forecasted LMPs. There is a fair amount of testimony on this particular topic about the difference between longer contracts and shorter availability of generation. So what the utility is proposing essentially is that, for instance, if a customer enters into a 5-year contract, the utility is proposing that the LMP forecast used would be reset every year. Renew and Cub both took a little bit of a different tact. Renew would propose to lock in that forecast at the beginning of, in my example, of the 5-year term. And I went back and forth and I reviewed the testimony, and where I ended up was I do think that, and commission staff did put forward a good suggestion about perhaps we consider implementing a true-up. I don't think we need to go there. I feel comfortable with alternative 1, accepting what the applicant has proposed. I think, in my opinion, and I thought Ms. Wilson did a good job in her testimony of sort of explaining, I think it was her rebuttal, explaining why Renew thinks it's best to lock in that LMP forecast, but in my mind, resetting that LMP each and every year is the best way to approximate actual avoided costs for that upcoming year. And so for that reason, I'm at alternative 1.
Yeah, we saw something similar in the NSPW with the desire to have a longer-term forecast locked in, but those by their nature are just more uncertain. And I think one of the goals of this, at least, is to bring some more certainty and more approximation to avoided costs. So I think that the short-term LMP is just that more accurate methodology, and I agree with the utility suggestion here. So I'm at alternative 1.
Okay. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, I would be, I think, basically at an alternative 2, which would say that for the single-year situations and the behind-the-meter, that the LMP forecast is sufficient. But I guess I was persuaded by the arguments from Renew related to the longer-term contracts, and that's consistent with my thoughts with NSPW as well, is that for those longer-term contracts, I think that it would be appropriate. Renew argues that in their brief that, FERC and the PURPA regulations specifically contemplate that situation of allowing for longer-term contracts. So I would be supportive of the contracted energy rates. I think one thing that would help this record on these topics going forward is hearing how other states and utilities do it, because we're kind of myopically just looking at one utility and hearing from Renew about a preferred option that's different and I think reasonable. But I think understanding sort of, would we be the only state doing this if we adopt that contract, or do 42 states already do it that way? We don't have that sort of additional insight. So I think thinking maybe that'd be advice for interveners that are advocating this, is how do other states do this going forward? So thanks.
Okay. All right, issue 4 is the applicant's overall proposal to compensate customers for avoided capacity costs under the options just and reasonable. So this is where the option A and option B come into play, and I think Commissioner Huebner, you sort of foreshadowed this. Option A, the way that I understand it, is just very similar to just a straight net metering setup, and option B then goes to the front of the meter. The pricing that they've proposed is that under that option B, they would allow customers to enter a 5 or a 10-year contract, and then if for the 5-year contract, they would take the value of cone and multiply it by 25%. For 10-year contracts, they would take cone and they would use a 50% multiplier. The company or the utility is saying that this type of a calculation more fairly compensates for short-term capacity. CUB came in and said that the utility should be crediting capacity on the basis of KW, which is delivered capacity, and not energy. And Renew is in that same boat. They're advocating for $1 per KW based on accredited capacity. So for me, this took a lot of analysis and contemplation. And I guess where I landed was, I think the utilities proposal is reasonable. I think right now where we stand, I don't feel comfortable basing payments on capacity, because capacity doesn't measure what's actually being produced. That's energy, right? And so I think we swing the pendulum too far if we start basing payments on capacity instead of what is actually being provided to the utility and then onto the grid for all customers' usage. There's also a problem in general with modeling, because the models don't recognize demand resources as generation resources. We could have a really long and technical discussion about that, but that's sort of reality as we sit here today. The models look at those resources as load modifying resources. And so then comes the question of what's the fair way to compensate those resources. I think this is a step in the right direction, the way that NSP's tariff was a step in the right direction. I think for me, I'm comfortable taking an incremental approach, and I think that this is a good first step in terms of aligning the market signal and the prices paid to customers to strike the balance of encouraging continued adoption of distributed resources while still understanding the modeling and the forecasting process that happens on the utility side. So I think that the modifications, and this particular issue received a lot of attention, and there was a lot of back and forth. And I appreciate that, and I would urge interveners to continue to have that conversation. It's also going to come up when we talk about avoided transmission costs. I think that while in a perfect world, the modeling would be able to be a little more granular and really reflect what's happening. Right now, I think that this is a reasonable way to move forward while continuing to strike that balance. And so I think there's going to be further study that's going to be required for some of these issues, but for right now, I think that the utilities proposal is reasonable. So I'm at alt one.
Okay, thanks. I had some concerns about the utilities proposal on, not the option B. It was nuanced, and I thought it was an interesting way to look at the long-term capacity for those fixed generation assets that they know will be there. Staff, I thought, had an interesting counter proposals to it, and utility responded back to that. I think they all fall, again, this is where we're trying to get precise, where we can't yet get precision. But I thought the utilities proposal on the option B was okay, except my concern was, do they need the capacity? If you remember when we talked about, I don't know if they need it. And there should have been a discussion about that. There's maybe the absence of the discussion there's a presumption that they need it, but I would have some more comfort in improving that if I knew that they needed it. When we talked with NSPW's case, they said, well, that's fine, we'll do it. Basically, we'll do this for the long-term contracts, but we don't need capacity until 2023. Okay. I don't know when they need this capacity. I mean, they're building a lot right now. It was a nuanced discussion, so I'm a little hesitant to approve it until I know if it's needed now. And then for option A, that's not. I was really confused. I thought that the utilities' testimony on avoided transmission was very good, and it was essentially, the modeling didn't show anything. And they also said the same thing for capacity. I mean, Mr. Cook's testimony says the modeling showed no change to WPL's planned resource additions resulting from the addition of the modeled resource and no incremental avoided capacity from the incremental 1 megawatt block of system capacity. So basically, they're saying our modeling didn't show it, but we're still going to try to do something. I didn't understand that. They didn't follow that logic in transmission. And I'm going to be consistent in following the logic here, unless it can be shown to me, especially on a resource that the utility cannot call on, is not under their control, just like we did in NSPW. We said no capacity, 2 of us said no capacity costs on that one, because that's not within the utility's control. So right now, I would send this back until I get more information about if they need the capacity, but otherwise I'm at not approve. Commissioner Huber?
So you would approve no capacity, so you would not approve the tariff at all, or you would just have no capacity value in the
Right
tariff?
now, no capacity
Okay,
value until they
okay.
come back and show if they need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. No, I have a 6-part thought on this. This was an issue that there was a lot, and I think it all flows together. So first on the modeling, what we asked the utilities to do in this case was show us through their modeling what we called an increment and a decrement approach, right? What the utility presented to us was an increment and said, we don't need any more, so the next megawatt's worth 0. To me, that was a very perilous set of testimony to make, because then you ask the question is, well, what's the decrement? If you don't need the next megawatt, do you need the last megawatt? Because you're going to be asking for full recovery of your most recent megawatt that you've approved. And then how many megawatts are you going back before you're saying there's a value? I thought that was really a fine line that they were trying to walk, and one that anyway. I was not convinced. I thought that their approach to just take cone and cut it in half or cut it down by 3/4, I did not find that to be just and reasonable. I think that was just we don't want to pay the full value of capacity, so here's a way to not pay it. I thought Renew's argument about cone, as we talked about with NSPW, in that case, there was 2 options. The basically peaker method that NSPW proposed and we approved, or Renew had argued for cone. In this, there's not really a peaker method being proposed here. And I think that would have behooved this record to understand, okay, you built Riverside, you're building a bunch of solar. What's the capacity value to the utility of that? To me, that's the decrement side, and that's about where the capacity value might be. Absent that in the record, to me, the strongest argument was the transparent, market-driven value of cone. So I would support a capacity value of cone based on this record.
For A and B?
Yes, but that's consistent with my view on the behind the meter, which is the A, is in the long run, if you're reducing the load requirements of the utility, then that offsets their need to build capacity in the future. Again, as we talked about, is that dispatchable or not? It may be the case that cone is not the right number for behind the meter, but there's no other number in this record. It's either 0 or cone. I don't think it's 0. The other question was the loss factors. So this utility is the only one of the 5, my understanding, that did not propose line losses. And we talked about that last time, whether they should be at average or marginal. Here they're saying 0. I would include line losses. I think it's pretty demonstrated and well accepted through energy efficiency, demand response programs, focus on energy is brought up in the record, that there are losses avoided when you're generating within the distribution system. You're not needing to bring in generation from longer distances. So I would include a loss factor at either the average or the marginal loss. I thought, as we did with NSPW, the capacity credit should be paid per kilowatt, and that's consistent with how the utilities procure their resources. You know, they come in and tell us, this is the cost per kilowatt. This is the cost based on the UCAP value. I think that carrying that consistency forward to the biodigesters, hydro facilities, solar facilities, wind, I mean, at their appropriate factors, but compensating them on a per KW. And CUB does support that as well. So those were my thoughts on the capacity. So I would be at an alt 2 based on my read of this. And Chair, if you're not comfortable with cone as the metric, the utility did offer that they thought PSCW witnesses Blair Alternative 2 approach to valuing capacity could be, I don't know the words they used, maybe did not oppose, something to that effect, that approach as opposed to the position that they had advocated at the beginning. So as a backstop, I mean, I would be willing to accept the Blair Alternative 2 approach if you're not comfortable with cone.
And did you say, Commissioner Hebner, that you would use cone for both A and B? Was that what you said?
Right, and that's the way, I mean, this was drawn out, I think, in this testimony as well as the last one is really witness Kell describing how in the longer run, as you have these behind-the-meter resources, what you're effectively doing is reducing the load and reducing the planning reserve margin requirement for the utility. So you're reducing that utility's need to build capacity. I know that you did not agree with that
Right.
behind the meter. So if we need to kind of break this out and figure out which parts there's 2 votes on and which parts there aren't, I'm fine with that too.
Okay. And then you said you would incorporate line losses?
Right, and that, yeah, that, I mean, obviously was discussed mostly by Renew, but I do believe that, I'm trying to think if, CUB did not identify that on this specific issue, but I can look back in the record to see if CUB had a position. I don't believe they were opposed to the inclusion of line losses conceptually. It is consistent with what we've done in a lot of other programs, so.
And Commissioner Nowak, you're at
Well,
alt 4.
yeah,
You would-
if this is where it's going, I'm not, yeah, I think that the proposal advanced by Commissioner Hebner would result in a great cost shift and cross-subsidization of, from non-participating DG customers to, they would be shouldering more of a burden. There's some testimony that shows the massive differences in some of the prices that would be paid under, and using cone for a short term is, I think, not acceptable. And again, I still don't think you should use it for the option A when it's only as available anyway, capacity. And then as far as line losses go, it was conceptually put in here. I don't think there's even an adequate record, to be fair, to put anything about a number associated with a line loss in here.
Yeah. Yep, I mean, obviously, under option A, it goes back to the dispatchability, and I don't feel comfortable with that, as you, you know, as you correctly remembered. And I just, I don't feel comfortable that cone is the appropriate value. That's why I thought, in my mind, the evidence that was put forth supported the applicant's proposal. I thought that it was a reasonable calculation under these circumstances. So I think that leaves us all 3 in different spots.
Well, I'm close on, I think you and I are the same on B, I just don't know when it goes into effect. And if you're at no capacity on A.
Correct.
Yeah, you and I are, it just when it goes into effect. And I'm happy to have them, follow up, we can approve it with a follow-up to, I don't know how we, I was thinking about that yesterday. I'm just afraid of putting it available now if it's not needed,
But does PURPA allow I don't think PURPA allows that question to be asked, of
we-
whether or not it's needed. If it's a QF, it's a QF, right? I mean,
But it's still, it has to be an avoided cost, so if there's no
Well,
avoided
oh,
cost.
sure,
Yeah,
right,
so,
right.
yeah.
You have to
I
connect
think
it regardless.
one of the factors for me is, and this is in the record, as part of WPL's resource plan, they're planning to procure about 145 megawatts, I think, as the number of distributed resources. So to me, these are the types of resources that would be filling that portion of that plan. And so whether that's utility-owned distributed resources or privately owned, to me, both of those would fit, and so they should be viewed relatively similarly to the extent that they can be. So I thought certainly for the option B, there needs to be a capacity value, and I think that, I'm comfortable with that being in effect when this tariff comes into play. So I guess my question for maybe Chair Vach would be on Blair's alternative 2, are you comfortable with that, basically middle ground between the utilities proposal and the advocates or Renew's proposal? Otherwise, I mean, I don't want this docket to land with an uncertain or no capacity value.
Yeah.
Or sort of a not now, so I don't want to land there. But I think Blair's alternative 2 was a appropriate middle ground perhaps between the proposals.
and that's using the 5-year average PRA and cone values with an 8-year transition period? That's what we're talking about? And then taking the average?
Yeah.
Okay. My answer to that is I don't know. I need more time. I need to, because I had considered it and I ended up with the utilities proposal. So I would need to go back and compare, and I'm looking at his testimony right now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
We could go through the rest and see if anything else needs to take a break.
Right, or
and then
we can
take a
lay it
break.
over.
If we lay it over, could we ask them to provide information, or supplement the record on
You'd have to
timing?
then provide it,
Reopen?
and provide an opportunity
Maybe
for
we heard
comment.
comment.
So you're
Yeah.
basically reopening for a mini little procedure on that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me,
Now that I said it, we're
that
probably gonna
question
get it
is
anyway.
clearly answered. They have a resource plan in place with various resources that they're procuring,
Yeah, that's fine.
so, yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. I think we should get through the remainder of the decision matrix, see
Yeah, that
kind
sounds
of where
good.
we land.
Yep, that sounds great.
And then it's possible that we might need to lay this over and bring it back.
Sure.
Okay.
Next week.
All right. Let's see. Issue 5. Is the applicant's proposal to offer 5-year and 10-year contracts just and reasonable? We also saw this with NSP. I believe NSP also offered a 15-year. Renew continues to advocate for a 20-year contract option in an effort to provide certainty and to mitigate risk for would-be developers. I do think it makes sense to offer the 15-year contract, and I would actually ask the utility to use that same, well, the same fixed capacity credit that they are proposing, but I understand now it might be dying on the vine. But I think it does make sense and it's reasonable to add a 15-year option. I believe it's also consistent with, to your point, Commissioner Huebner, what's happening in other states. I think Michigan for sure has a 15-year option. I think 20 years is too long. And so for sake of consistency and understanding, trying to trying to strike that balance of mitigating some risk, I would approve the 5 and 10-year contracts, and then I would add a 15-year contract. Now, how the fixed capacity credit would be calculated is still up in the air.
So can I just ask if on the previous issue, accepting the utilities methodology for a 15-year, you would just continue that escalation basically to get to whatever that value is?
Yep.
Okay, so that would be, if it was 25%, 50, it would basically be a 75%.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
That'll be good to discuss, yeah.
Yeah, I just think a 5 and 10, this is where I think we just have to leave it to the discretion of the utility management about what they want to offer as a service to these customers. I don't know that this needs to be consistent among the utilities. If this is what they feel that they want to start with and work with, I think this is their call, and I think 5 and 10 are reasonable, so I would stay at alternative 1.
Okay. I will join you at alternative 2, Chair Vach, and add a 15-year. I thought for a new resource, a lot of these resources are going to have lives even beyond 20 years, so I was convinced that longer-term contracts could be of value to the brand-new resources, and I think 15 years is a good addition to that. So I will join you there.
With the capacity credit TBD.
Right. Right?
Well, let's come back and discuss it, because I think that it may help resolve some of my concerns about capacity value, is if the resources can sign up for longer term and truly be a dependable resource, then that may, they may be able to get a capacity value that really reflects that. So I'm going to think about that in our break.
Okay.
But I may join you on that.
Okay.
And that may solve my issue on number 4 as well. So, okay.
All right. Issue 6, is it reasonable to include an early termination penalty for customers participating? Here, the utility proposes an early termination penalty equal to the contracted nameplate capacity multiplied by the capacity credit rate and 768 hours, which is the equivalent of 1 year. And so I thought that this was reasonable, and I was at alternative 1.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, issue 7. Now we get to talk about avoided transmission costs. So, again, NSP came up with an avoided transmission cost that was the result of a negotiated settlement between parties. And I believe it was 50, right? 50%.
50% of their embedded costs, I think, is the way they phrased it.
Here, the applicant is not offering an avoided transmission cost, so they essentially put that cost at 0. But that's not to say that they don't agree that there is a value of avoided transmission. My understanding of what was on the record is that it was extremely difficult to calculate what that avoided transmission system cost is. And it was a lot of, well, we would need to talk with ATC, we'd need to engage with ATC, we'd need to talk with MISO. And so in my mind, there's nothing on the record that gives me comfort to calculate an avoided transmission cost. That's not to say that I don't think that an avoided transmission cost exists and would be appropriate. But I don't feel comfortable making it up. I'm not going to sit here and just pull a number out. I also don't think it's appropriate to use what NSP used, because as we discussed when we talked about their tariff, that was a result of a negotiation. And that negotiation is germane to that utility and that utility's counterparties. And so in this instance, I would actually order the utility to go, to come back to us next year in 2023. I would ask them to get back to us by July 1st of 2023 with further analysis on avoided transmission costs and allow them to do what they said they needed to do, which is to have further discussion with ATC and MISO. I think that this is something that is one of those situations where we don't have the information, and so it's better to go out and get good information than to make a decision just arbitrarily choosing a number. And so I would love to hear from other stakeholders, particularly stakeholders whose large energy users or large energy use customers have demand charges that actually include transmission costs. So I think that if that type of a calculation can be done, then the inverse can be done. And so I would, in this particular case, I'm at Alt 1, where I am comfortable omitting it for now, but I would order the commission to come back to us, the applicant, not the commission, to come back to us by July 1st, 2023, with an analysis. And if the analysis truly shows that it's zero, well, then that's great. Then we have an analysis that shows that it's zero. But I don't think that's the case, and I don't think the applicant thinks that's the case either. So that's where I am on this one.
Yeah, I'm at alternative 1, too. You know, there was a lot of ink spilled on this discussion, and I've been consistent on avoided transmission costs for years on DG systems. And Renew puts a lot of speculative, what if, they make comparisons out to New England and California. You know, it does, their system needs to be looked at with an ATC. I thought the testimony of, I think it's Mr. Meyer, Mitch Meyer, was very good. You know, if we could ever show in one instance where there was an avoided any cost, not just a new line, but any transmission cost, it does not exist yet. And will it exist in the future? And do we need to start, maybe, but do we need to start compensating someone for that now? I don't think that's fair. I mean, we would just make it up, and you can't, you know, and I know Renew pushes back on this, but there could be increased costs due to some DG on the system. I mean, that whole holistic thing has to be looked at. And while the utility said, you know, it is a very difficult thing to measure, I think there also is the question, is there something to measure? So that is that question as well. Is there anything to measure, and then how do you measure it? So I'm not a big fan of requiring utilities to come back with proposals, but, you know, if they want to sit there and continue to crunch the numbers, that's fine. But we aren't there yet, and we shouldn't anticipate where this is going to go and start using ratepayer dollars to do that. So I'm alternative 1. I can join you on asking them to come back. It's not my preference, but I have a feeling that Commissioner Huebner is going to be in a different spot. So I'll join you on that.
Well, I would join you on the study for sure. I think that this is a really interesting and complex area, as you said, Commissioner Nowak. Lots of testimony on this. I think that it's just an extremely complicated issue. The two numbers that really stuck out to me in the record were the amount that WPL actually pays ATC for transmission services. So that was in the record at $63.36 per kilowatt for the year, or, you know, every year. There's something related to that. So if WPL's load goes down, they're going to pay less to ATC, and in my head, is that not an avoided cost? Didn't they reduce their costs? And then the question is, okay, well, the way ATC operates is basically, you know, the rate will just go up. If there's a lot of DG built, then ATC system costs stay the same and the rates will go up. And then there's sort of, well, the next layer of, okay, but what if ATC doesn't have to build a line 10 years from now because of the DG that's built? And so it's very sort of multi-layered, and figuring out sort of the values of each of those and the probabilities, and that's kind of what we need to get to, as you said, Chair Vach, is a more in-depth understanding of if there's a 5% chance that happens and that value is a very expensive investment, then who should get credited for that? Should large energy users get credited for that? If they reduce load, should DG be credited for that if DG gets built? These dockets are fascinating to me because you're really pulling open the components of how all of this is built and trying to understand it. So that was one number, and then the other was Witness Bandari's. She did have in her testimony, it's not really emphasized in their brief or elsewhere, but she did have a quote floor value of what she viewed as the floor value was $42 per kilowatt year. So, but I would approve a value now, but I think your proposal to get better information is appropriate.
Okay. So,
So I think you got 2 votes for alternative 1.
Yep.
I would approve a value now, but you got 3 votes to do the study.
what value would you use?
Based on this, I would use the $42 floor value. I mean, ATC's costs are $63. Clearly, we're not offsetting all of that. Ms. Bandari's floor value is projects that she specifically identified as being load growth related. And then from there, there's additional costs that include her estimates of percentages of load growth of other projects. So based on this record, that was the number that stuck out to me as being most reasonable, but not overvaluing what this contribution might be. So.
Okay. I'm going to stay at alt 1.
Yep.
Where I would allow it to be omitted, but I would require them to come back to us by July 1st, 2023.
Great. Thank you for that proposal. I thought that was very nice.
Great. Okay. Issue 8. Should the commission approve the applicant's revised parallel generation tariffs as requested by the applicant? So there are a couple issues that come up. Cub brought them up in one place, Renew brought them up in another place. So I do agree with 2 of Cub's proposals, which were identified elsewhere by Renew. The first is I would eliminate the requirement that customer-owned DER be located on the same premise as the customer's load. And I would also agree with removing that DER maximum production, that 105%, I would remove that. And then the last would be, just the condition that we just talked about related to avoided transmission costs.
Yeah, I don't really know how to say where I'm at on this because I approve some of the stuff, but I'm at no on others. I would not take Cub's suggestion on eliminating the maximum of 105% of their energy usage. I think, because there's imprecision in this, we have to try to limit as much cross-subsidization as possible. And, these entities shouldn't then be in the business of, you don't need more than the 105. And we need to, most of the other tariffs we have in place do have a maximum percent of their, that they can do for their annual usage. And I also think that for now, it makes sense to keep it located on their same premises as their load. I think that, again, we have to try to limit the amount of what is being, that's going to maybe add to other costs. We don't know what all that means. So I think this is just the more simplified way to keep moving this forward until this grows. And if there's a need to have it offsite load, I don't know that any customer has asked for that. Is there a need for it? There's nothing in the record about that. So I would approve-ish their parallel generation tariffs. I meant approve-ish.
Right. Okay, Commissioner Huebner.
Thank you for your position on Cubs items 2 and 3, Madam Chair. Those, as I flagged at the beginning, these were almost gatekeepers to the entirety of this docket for me. When we opened our generic proceeding, it was a hydropower facility in WPS. It's on a river. It's not near a customer. It's generating power. It's a standard PURPA QF facility. The fact that WPL's proposal did not even contemplate the capability of an actual QF, to me was like, what is happening? So I think removing the requirement that it's located at the same premises so that we can allow a biodigester on a farm with a really small load but a big biodigester, a hydropower facility, or the back 40 of a farmer who wants to build solar, those clearly contemplated by PURPA those are eligible. They should be eligible in this tariff. And going along with that then, because that river might not be near a customer, you can't limit it to me, the 105% of load, because you're talking about an independent generator. So thank you for those. I would agree with both of those, and that's where I would land. We talked about the delivered capacity credit. I guess we'll come back to that. I still favor that. I do think the company's approach on the high rate kilowatt hour is reasonable, but I think the per kilowatt is a little more reasonable, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Issue 9, should the applicant be required to submit additional tariff revisions in response? We talked about this in NSP. This is the same. It's, I'm assuming they would do this in the normal course, but I don't have a problem including it as an order point. So I was at alternative 1.
Yeah, I'm starting to get more, why do we put things in orders that we're going to either ask for or they just have to do? So my preference is alternative 2, because
Okay.
we, stating the obvious in orders is getting, I don't know. I don't know why we have to do that. So I would be at alternative 2.
Okay.
It's going to
I-
Until
happen.
the silver tsunami hits and everybody retires,
Well, yeah,
and then
that's coming sooner for me than later, trust me.
I'm at alt 1. I mean, we did include this for NSPW, and I think it's kind of just belt and suspenders that we do all know, certain rules are likely to change, et cetera, but it just solidifies that you need to come back when those rules do change and adjust, so I'm fine with that.
okay. And then I don't think I need to, so we already took this up. in
Yeah, right.
Issue 8, so I don't have anything further, I guess, is the way that I look at issue 10.
Yeah, I was at alternative 2 on this anyway, so, yeah.
Right, Renew had a couple other suggestions about a standard offer contract. I thought that needed to be developed in the record a lot more clearly, what that is that's different than a tariff. If that's something that they or others want to advocate for in the future, it needs to be, to me, much more developed. And then the distribution and environmental, we talked about that at the opening of the generic docket, and Chair, you brought it up. With the last one we took up, that we decided at this time not to include those because they weren't specified in PURPA as avoided costs. To me, that doesn't close the door that you can't continue to entertain that as this gets iterated in the future. But
Yeah.
at this time, it's not part of this proceeding, so.
Right, and I
yeah.
think it goes to the whole, this isn't one and done.
Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
yeah, okay. All right, so by my tally, that means we need to go back to issue 1 and, more importantly,
Yeah,
issue 4 remains a 1-1-1.
yeah.
And so,
I can just chime in because I was the sticky wicket on item 1, issue 1 was, it just kind of comes back to what they mean by availability. To me, we resolved that when we did issue 8,
Oh, sure.
making sure that, independent qualified facilities are eligible, this tariff is available to them. So to me, that kind of is an alt 2 maybe on this, but I think as long as it's captured, where we landed on those, my specific position on this is not really relevant. I'm fine with the move down to 5,000 because obviously that's the FERC approved.
Right.
So
Yep.
that may resolve our issues on issue 1,
Yeah.
Cindy?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Okay, so issue 4. Commissioner Hebner, you are at Alt 2. You would use cone, and you would include line losses under options A and B. As a fallback position, you indicated you would be comfortable with Mr. Blair's alternative 2, which appears on page 14 of his testimony. And Commissioner Nowak, you are at, you're with me on option A.
Yep.
In that it's fine the way that it's
Yeah.
drafted.
Yeah.
Right? It's option B, I was at the company's proposal, you do not agree.
No, I was at the company's proposal, but just on I had a question about timing on it. That's all. And if you're comfortable, there wasn't a discussion about need, but Commissioner Hebner had brought up their planning resource. So that was my only just dangling thing out there. But I'm fine with their proposal. I just don't know when it should start.
Meaning you don't know when the tariff should go into effect.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the avoided, when it will actually avoid capacity.
So not the tariff as a whole, but whether the capacity credit would be
Yes.
applied? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And, if there's some way we could structure it that there's, of course, then there would be more filings, but a follow-up for clarification or on that, I would just give me more comfort on that.
Can you walk me through what that looks like? Just give me an example.
Of the follow-up, I think the utility would have to let us know that what year they would have that need for a capacity shortfall. Like we saw, NSPW demonstrated that they didn't have a capacity shortfall until 2023. And given the size of the DG on their system now and what's anticipated in the next couple of years, would that even, near to help offset a capacity? So that's where I'm trying to understand, when do they need it?
Right.
Like, when would it actually avoid capacity or may have an avoided cost for them?
And their clean energy blueprint, as Commissioner Hebner indicated, includes planning, right? Like they incorporate the use of distributed resources as part of that plan.
Yeah, and so maybe I didn't read that well enough in the record, so
Right.
I could,
Okay. In my mind, the fact that it is part of the plan, that's what they're planning to use as part of their blueprint, indicates that it is needed. And so I'm comfortable saying that capacity need exists. So that's where I land on that particular issue. We can lay this over.
let me just check one
or we
thing
can
with
take a
staff real
break.
quick, just like 2 minutes.
Okay.
2
all right,
minutes, yeah.
2 minutes.
And the other kind of corollary was what you proposed on issue 5, which would be add a 15-year contract and extend the calculation of a capacity value out to 75% of cone.
Correct.
So I'm going to think about that
Okay. So 2
while we
minutes.
have a break. So I might be more than 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. Sure.
think we're ready. We're here.
Okay.
Thank you, well, thank you for the 2-ish minute break. I can join you at, well, I wish the record was clearer, but I think there was nuance for a purpose to the utilities testimony. I can be satisfied that the credit going into effect when the tariff goes into effect is reasonable and that their proposal for the credit amount is reasonable for option B.
Okay.
So you two are at alt one.
No. Alt 1 includes option A as proposed.
Yeah.
I thought you were a no on option A.
No. I was a no at Commissioner Hebner's proposal.
So for option A, they're giving a credit for the facilities that they don't have control over.
Oh, this is the dispatchability one.
Yeah.
Yes. No, you're correct.
Yeah, I thought, yeah.
Yep.
So, right, but the utilities proposal does not
Correct.
include a capacity value.
Right.
For
So I'm
those.
accepting it, which is, it stays the way.
I think
that
you
it
guys
is.
are in the same
Yes,
spot.
yes, yes, yes.
Yep.
Yes, yes,
And I'm in a different spot
right.
for some, up to 6 reasons, as I described. But on issue 5, we have the chair and I agreeing to a 15-year contract. And related to that, I would agree to essentially continue that method. And I think it's I don't know if it's exactly, but the approximately 75% of Cohen for the 15-year contract. And I would join you on that.
Okay.
And that, I think, is a good,
Just as to the calculation for 15 years and not for 5 and 10?
the way that, I think technically, yes. The way this question is worded is, should it offer 5 and 10-year? So I would support the fact that they exist and then also a 15-year. But for the 15-year, I would accept that
But the,
75% of Cohen.
but the offer is, okay. You're offering 5, 10, and 15.
Yep. Which is the same spot as the chair, I think. Yep. Okay.
All right, and then,
Right.
So they're gonna, the utility's gonna have to come back to us with that calculation. Or are you directing them to use the exact same? I just want to make sure that it's clear.
right, that's what I was trying to get at, because under the 5, 10, and now 15, they're
Yep.
going to use the calculation that was approved for option B.
B.
With the modification, because we're adding 15,
Yeah.
that they extended out. So that's where I was confused
Yep.
with you saying, I'm good with 15 calculated at that.
Yep.
I'm glad they're offering 5 and 10, but I was unclear whether you then were backing into approving option B.
In issue 4.
On issue 4. I mean, on issue 4, there's other aspects to it related to option A and loss factors, and the fact that I thought it should be as a per kilowatt. So I have things that I'm not supporting about the proposal.
But you're okay using option
Option B.
B calculation to get out to a 15-year
Right.
contract to get at
Right.
your concerns that you outlined.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so option B will be used for 5, 10, and 15.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
And Commissioner Nowak, I have you joining for 5 and 10, but dissenting as to 15 on issue 5.
Yep.
Okay. And then, issue.
Tanner has a question.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Is it prescriptive that it's 75, or that percentage is developed in a manner consistent with how the 25 and 50 was developed? It presumably is 75, but I don't know for sure.
For me, it's the latter.
The latter, that it
Right.
shall be developed in a manner consistent with how
Yes.
the 25 and 50 was developed.
Yes.
Yep. And I support that.
Okay.
I think that the methodology is what we're approving. Yep.
Okay.
It's just, yeah.
And then I'm just confirming on issue 8, where we landed, because again, we're talking options A's and option B's in here. As to how the calculation of the capacity. So
Right. So I think we have
2 votes to
to,
take 2 of Cub's subjections.
correct. We have 2 votes to eliminate the requirement that it be located.
Location,
And we have 2 votes.
105.
Yep, to not limit it.
Okay?
We do not have votes to credit the DER based on delivered capacity
Right,
instead of energy.
right.
That was
Okay, got it.
Commissioner Nowak and I were on the same page, but Commissioner Hebner did not agree with us.
Okay. I'll note a partial dissent of some sort.
Okay,
Dissentish, yes.
right, okay, all right. Is everybody comfortable, or do we want to bring the draft order back to us?
We should probably bring it back.
Yeah,
I think we should bring it back.
okay.
Sounds fair.
Can we- let's bring it back.
For the minutes, because that's going to form the basis of the.
And so we don't need to revisit, no, you cleared up issue 1.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I still
Is this
don't think
correct?
that they've interpreted it correctly, so I'm going to follow up and fix the minutes later. But yes, for now.
Okay.
Minutes are going to reflect what you say
I
today.
know for now, but
You won't change the minutes, you'll have to change it.
yeah, yeah, I might do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that the, do you have it up?
And then, I'm sorry, I heard a request, the order come back?
Yes, please.
Are we ready?
Ready.
I move in docket 6680 TE 107, we approve the application pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. That concludes our official business for today. The next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, July 21st, 2022 at 10:30 a.m.
Move we stand adjourned until Thursday, July 21st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.